Over is what role does emotion have when we're playing in mergers and acquisitions? I think my own belief is that the seller, he's just looking at tax implications and how much he can minimise tax, Stephen. So that's probably his big motivation. I've got this big number. I want to pay as little tax as possible. So I guess emotions, and this is for everybody across the board, but how does that play into an M&A?
Emotion is a good thing and a very bad thing at times. It does. A transaction can run anywhere from, we would typically tell clients walking in the door who think about selling or buying that it's going to take somewhere around 6 months, but I sit here and I've got a call as soon as I get out of here with a transaction that's been going for a bit over 2 years, and they're still at each other's throats. So it's a long and quite stressful process. There are the ups and downs. We talk about deal fatigue, trying to keep momentum in a deal. Emotions can absolutely play a big part. I've seen instances where I think it was like 1 a.m. on the night or the morning before everyone agreed to sign, and the vendor rang up the advisor and said, deal's off. After months of negotiations, contracts, everything ready to sign, and they just had a bit of a brain explosion and said, nah. So that's probably the tail end of where emotion can blow the thing up. I think that the aim of a deal is keep that momentum going, keep everyone as close to the same page, communication lines open, and you've just got to be prepared to ride the bumps. Sales cap on here. If you've got an advisor who sort of can understand the ups and downs, hopefully that can guide and provide a sort of a steady hand too, because it is very easy to, things will come up that you're not expecting, and that can heighten emotions. But hopefully you're dealing with someone who's been there and done that before, and so they can keep you calm and ensure that it's just a little blip on the road. Or if it is a big deal, then they can help you blow the deal up. So, anyone else?
Can you hear me? Yep, okay. The only thing I'd add to that, totally agree that the emotion comes into it, but it's also really hard for people to walk away from an acquisition or merger that's been in their head. It's almost like a personal failure, or there might be a reason why they want this to proceed, but then when they start to do the due diligence around the financial, or they'll still try and find a way. And I don't know if you find that quite often, Andrew, in particular, that it's hard for clients that are so hell-bent, or this might have been 5 years in the making in the back of their mind, and it's finally they want to sell. It's really hard for them to go, actually, this isn't a good fit and this could destroy the current culture and business I've got.
Yeah, I think that's true, Belinda. I think due diligence is a time of great disappointment. Because you go in with a dream of what you're buying, and you get into the finances and you realise they've been bullshitting about the underlying profitability. You start digging into the people and you find some toxic individuals. And you've got to remember that you're buying humans, and that when someone goes to sell you something, they honestly believe that's the true price. And when they tell you they're a really good person, they actually mean it. It doesn't mean the horns on their head. They can't see them when they look in the mirror. So due diligence has some really good upside, and the problem is you can get stuck in the emotion of due diligence and think it's failing. Whereas I think Belinda and I both agree, when we get into due diligence, we start to see what we can change and what we can make profitable and good. So have two sets of eyes. But remember, nobody sells because they don't believe it's a good idea for them, and nobody buys because it's the best thing they've seen since sliced bread. So the first 2 weeks are all emotion and excitement. And by the time you've got the information memorandum, you're pretty well wedded to it. It's very hard to shake it after that. And as I said, you get into due diligence and you'll be chatting to Stephen, and Stephen's going, that's not the EBITDA at all. It's not right. And at that stage, Belinda would go, well, why isn't it right? What can we do about it? We could get to that. Yeah, we could. This is the changes we need to make. And then we go back to the contracts, look at the employment contracts, look who we want. There's a lot of ways to craft play.
Simon, that's a really good question. That's the sort of question that has had us all talking about stuff. And the emotion in the in all transactions, in most of the processes, is really significant. One of the things that we say often when we're looking at claims issues, safety issues, those types of things, is take the emotion out of it, right? Get somebody that is slightly independent to review it. But the emotional journey in any transaction goes from the beginning of the transaction to the end. Somebody's selling their baby, you're coming in there, somebody else is looking at your baby and assessing how good it is, right? It's not a fun time. Nobody likes to look in the mirror. So there's always going to be some emotion involved in that. And then once the transaction's finished and we are dealing with the people that are involved in it, they've got some emotion in there as well. I always did it like this. This was my business. Well, it's not your business anymore. We're going to do it this way. We need to look at things in a different light. That emotional journey is before the transaction, during the transaction, and after the transaction. And it's something that you really need to consider.
No, I'm actually got a question for Andrew. You talked before about, sometimes you can bring across some toxic people that maybe didn't appear toxic until you brought them over. Legally, what are your options if you've signed a contract saying we'll keep you on for 3 years? What are your options to get rid of that person, and what damage can that do at that point in time to the other people that you've brought across?
This is the exact call I've got after this meeting. So
Yeah, look, I think as you're structuring the deal going forward, you've got to have in the structure a place of regular review as to where someone's terminating with a payout figure that rolls from that. Does that make sense? So if you've got a 3-year deal with a restraint that's going to last for 2 years afterwards, the restraint sits inside, the sale agreement sits inside the restraint, so it's measured. What you've got to do is think sideways and go, look, this was a key player. They could be good, they could be terrible. And so in the contract with them, you have a sliding scale from when they can go and what they get. The real big problem is that most sales are done in tranches. So you get a payout figure 1 year out, 2 years, 3 years out, and this person's waiting for the 3-year out figure. So if you don't have an objective method of measuring this person's performance and input, you can't deal with that end figure. And you end up with sort of good lever, bad lever type things, which are just terrible and end with endless litigation. So clarity is everything. You say to a person as they're coming in, it's probably too late, Stephen, you're a key person in the business, this is what delivery looks like. This is good, this is what it's not. This is what it looks like culturally, this is what it looks like financially, this is what it looks like in as far as your leadership role goes and your responsibilities. At any time, after 3 months, we can take action on this and this is what you would get. After 6 months, 12 months, whatever. But you break it up so there is a different leaving potential. So the person turns out to be terrible when they perform badly, well, you can get them out, but you're still going to pay them quite a lot of money. But that's the risk, isn't it? When you go into the draft in football and you're paying someone $900,000 to play on the wing and you play them half-forward flank, you're taking a risk. Okay? And that's the problem with what we've got.
I've got another question, probably more directed at you, Belinda, because our company's been through a few acquisitions over the past few years, and I guess as an active purchaser and the CEO of our business, what are the things you're first looking at when we're acquiring another business to bolt into the BJS group?
Yeah, I think for most businesses, it's part of your growth strategy, obviously, unless it's a supply chain you want to secure or something like that. But for our organisation, it's certainly part of our growth strategy. And really the cultural is the key piece for us.
That was it. That was the answer I was looking for. Well done.
No, it really is. For where I sit, I want the seller to be as happy as we are with the acquisition or merger. And so it's really important that you really can't change culture quickly. And Andrew and I were talking about this earlier. To think even if your company's got a great culture that you're going to bring another company in and change that overnight, it's impossible. There's big money out there in consultants working on culture, and they're out there for a reason, because it's companies' biggest challenge is to not only create a really good culture, but also enhance that over time and keep it going. The other thing that Andrew touched on earlier too was that we're really upfront. Our operations team do a fabulous job dice here today, and we really do dot our I's and cross our T's more than other brokers. So we know when people come across to us, they're going to have a culture shock and a change around that. So we are really open with them. The first 3 months, your head's going to be spinning and it's going to be a big change, but trust the process. You're going to love it in the long run. You're going to understand why we do what we do to protect our clients, and you're going to get the bigger picture. But I'm not telling you that it's going to be all rainbows and unicorns when you come across to BJS. The first 3 months, the change shift is going to be huge. So the other thing we're really passionate about is anything we acquire, we plan to grow. So even from a seller that's not going to be there and just going to sell and walk away, we'll put them in part of the rise. So if we do a rise and fall, we like to think what we do well. So we will rise with that company. So we want them to be part of that. So 18 months down the track, they'll get another kick in that settlement because of what we've done, and they mightn't have even been part of that. But now they feel that was a really positive transaction, and not only that's our brand and our image that we've left with that acquisition. So I think that environmental and social governance, and not only that brand and image around what you're doing out in the community, is far bigger in that acquisition space.
Yeah, thanks. Is there any questions from the floor? Anyone else before I ask another one? I'll just hold the microphone. Just down the front. Just to your right there.
This might be a question for the whole panel, but maybe more towards Simon. Are you seeing much in the way of vendor due diligence happening before the event?
Easy answer, no. Generally, that's what part of today is about, that Jay and I have both seen over the last couple of years the shock that clients get when they've bought a business and haven't done this. Yeah. What we see is generally they get a Stephen, get an Andrew in, they go through the finance and the legals, and then they get a rude awakening.
And Stephen, are you seeing much in the way of, you've got a buy side and a sell side. Are you seeing both sides, a client that might be looking to be purchased in the future, actually having due diligence done on them?
As in preparing their own vendor due diligence?
Correct. Reverse due diligence.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Look, sometimes. Good way if you're possibly going to target multiple buyers and you want to get multiple buyers up the curve very quickly. So there's a strategic reason behind it. We also do almost like a sale-ready type offering to our clients if they're considering succession or selling for whatever reason. And that is like a mini due diligence on itself, but it's for possibly up to a 3-5 year time frame. We look at it from a buyer's perspective. We poke and prod. We say, here's the issues. It gives them time to rectify. Or if you can't rectify, it gives you time to at least control the narrative too when you take it to market. Uncertainty is something that spooks buyers. So if there's an issue and you can't do something about it, it's at least it's in the vendor's interest to be able to at least control that narrative, put it out there up front, but also then explain it in a way that is not going to frighten off the buyer. So we do see a bit of it. It's not maybe 10%, 20%, maybe even less than that probably, but it is out there and we do a few of them.
Okay, thank you.
One of the significant things around that vendor piece is for the vendor to give some consideration as to how they're going to dispose of what it is that they're disposing of. Particularly if I'm selling the whole business, then generally I may be able to transition any of my potential losses going forward. But if I'm retaining part of my business, if I'm selling off an arm of my business, then there may well be a significant number of exposures left behind in the business that I'm retaining. So that's one of those things that I think really needs to be considered more than it is at the moment.
Probably just one other thing there. If I wind up a business as part of the sale, so I'm winding it up, the purchaser is setting up a new business, I've already paid my premiums, so I have no future liability. There can be 100 claims come in. I've already paid the premium for those years, so there's no liability from a premium perspective for me going forward, as long as I'm no longer employing.
The The only other thing I'd add to that is the like run-off professional indemnity and covers like that. As the buyer, you mightn't really care whether the seller's protected. That's their problem. I'm not buying that risk. But you will care when you get tied into the litigation later and it costs you, 150 grand and 18 months of your key people's time to prove that you weren't meant to be tied into that. So making sure that the seller has the right ongoing insurances to protect them actually protects the buyer longer term as well.
And look, I think the sad truth is people don't do very good due diligence of any sort. I think that's the risk that we run up against. The larger transactions, people do very detailed financial due diligence, but most of our clients have made their mind up as they walk through the door. And we spend the next 6 months saying to them, you sure you want to do this? You sure you want to do this? And look, from our point of view, for our business, we would have half a dozen to a dozen people on the vendor side saying, look, this is who we are. If you want to come to us, these are the things you'd have to present and demonstrate, which allows them to actually clean up their books before they come to us, get rid of a few employees they shouldn't have had. So the one that's coming through for June next year is somebody we've been chatting to for a year and a half, and they've just gradually been building their business to a stage where they know they would fall within our parameters of what we'd be interested in buying. So I think it's a really good idea to do, but I also think for purchasers who are out there looking for good clients, good buyers, to say who they are and what they're after, because there's a lot of people who've never thought about it. And when they see it, they go, so this would be my return if I did that? Yes, it would. And they're very, very valuable and skillful, but you've got to tell them they're alive. So I think it's a good way of doing it.
Is there anyone else from the floor? Jessica, fire away.
What are the potential exposures when it comes to not marrying those cultures appropriately, and how do you manage that from an insurance perspective?
One of the biggest problems, funny enough, is deciding who's actually going to stay on and what the structure's going to look like as well. So if you don't have your key people aligned to how it's going to go, or those culture drivers, then key people will leave. If uncertainty makes people leave, and in the current market, they can leave and go anywhere. So it is really that communication and that transparency around that. But equally, if you have to do the acquisition and you know the culture is really bad, then you really have to start with a change management plan. And it has to be a major part of the acquisition, knowing the hurdle that you're going to face, because people, as Andrew said, they don't change easily, and forced change is not really going to be a long-term good culture. It has to be buy-in. People have to see the bigger picture. So that information sharing is really critical.
Probably when we look at the workers' comp safety space, obviously safety culture is extremely important. If you've inherited a business that has poor safety culture, you can expect claims that you shouldn't have. Slips, trips, falls, issues with non-guarded machinery, those sort of things. But what we generally see is most places have that sorted, and the culture is about the actual management. And often we hire toxic managers who don't treat their staff well, who don't encourage them, who don't grow them, and that can lead to significant claims in the mental injury space. And what we know from a mental injury perspective is they're predicting by the end of this decade 33% of all new claims will be mental injury claims. Then we take a step forward and look at, when we have a claim, what is their culture about return to work? So if we've actually got a culture of, I don't want to hear from you until you've got a capacity, or I don't want to hear from you until you're fully fit to come back to work, we know that's going to drive increased premiums. The biggest correlator for premium growth is lost time. So if we're not bringing back in, if we have a culture that is not encouraging return to work, not proactively identifying ways to get people back in, then we're going to have higher premiums, and we're going to inherit that, which is going to hurt our own premiums.
I think one of the things that is really important on that particular culture piece is that you identify it early, you understand what you've got, you be prepared to take the full journey. So if you're going to go through that path, and you go down the path of managing that culture and putting a change management process in place, then you stick the journey. You don't just go, oh, we're going to try it, it's got hard, I'm going to stop, and then I get stuck with that culture.
Look, I think the other part when you buy a business is there's two very simple rules, which is we'll empower you to be successful and you will comply with our rules. And what people don't do is they have legacy rules hanging over, or they have different ways of banking, they have different ways of doing trust, they have different ways of doing anything. The first rule of taking over a business is say, we'll learn from what you're doing, but you will comply with our rules. And that's the hardest part of change management, because there's a whole lot of people who own those dumb rules and just won't let you inside. So when you start talking to people about buying them, say, look, we want you to be great. We want you to succeed. We want to give you autonomy. Autonomy looks like this, but success looks like complying with our rules. And from day one, you will comply with all our rules, our people rules, our banking rules, our policies and procedures will become yours. We'll take you through the change process over a period of 3 months. We'll give you a bit of a moratorium if you muck up, but understand after 3 months you break a rule, you're dead.
Yeah, one thing I'll give you a live example of that, of dumb rules that they always have good intentions. One of these transport company acquisitions we did, their driver's record was incredible. There was a massive motivation for that driver record to be incredible, a financial incentive if they didn't have accidents. So guess what? They didn't report them. The minute they acquired the company and the financial incentives and those kind of things went, they got the real story of how these drivers. So then we work at that risk mitigation. There was a lot of safety audits and driver education, and it was also creating that culture where it's safe to report it. We want you safe. There's a lot you've got to look at. Another issue that I did want to touch on in my talk was leases. They're really overlooked when you buy a company. Leases have make good terms on them. Another company that we do the insurance for got burnt by buying what they thought was a small cafe but was previously on a petrol station. So the make good on that was huge if they ever wanted to leave, because they were responsible for the environmental impairment part of that as well. So that's why you need to talk to a team, because we do dig deep and investigate.
Yeah, just a quick follow-up and agreeing with what Andrew said there before. I think in terms of the culture, it is difficult through due diligence to really get an understanding exactly of what's going on inside the business. Often a vendor will only have a certain amount of people, inside the tent, inside the transaction. As a transaction progresses, they don't want their staff knowing that they're up for sale. They don't want everyone to know that everything's up in the air. Uncertainty can be a really bad thing, and key staff might say, I don't like this, I'm going to move on. So often a transaction is conducted with the buyer comes in with a full team of people, but the seller might be sitting there with maybe just the owner itself, one or two key financial members in the team, maybe their external accountant, and fingers crossed they've got a lawyer alongside as well, some good advisors, but a very limited ability. So when you're as a buyer sitting there saying, I need to speak to people, you might only get access to one or two people, and if you really sort of stamp your feet, maybe get access to an extra couple, maybe right at the end of the piece too, once there's enough certainty for the vendor to be comfortable to exposure to more people. So there's that. I think once you've got to get comfort yourselves, but then obviously once the transaction's completed, you've stood up in front of the new company and said, nothing's changing, you're all keeping your jobs, business as usual, this is a great opportunity, growth, etc. I think there's a really big onus on you to get into the business and like what Andrew was saying, is understand everything that they do to the nth degree, not necessarily turn it on its head, but at least get a really clear understanding of what's going on. That was supposed to be one short point. The other quick point was the other difficulty we've often faced is vendors themselves. So you might want to retain them for 6, 12, 3 years to keep that sort of continuity of the business. But look, it is a challenge from a vendor's perspective. They've gone from running their own show, being answerable to nobody, to then suddenly having an overlord telling them what to do. And that can be a really challenging thing. I've seen a few transactions, best of intention, buyer and seller hit it off, great relationship, 3-year contracts. The vendor was actually intended to grow into this business and actually become the national manager of this new service offering they were buying. So great expectations. He's now out the door, and there's some pretty severe concerns about what he's been doing over the last 6, 12 months. So greatest of intentions, but that relationship does change. It is a challenge for the vendor, and I think you just need to go into it with, again, best intentions, but have a backup plan.
As Andrew said, as Andrew said,
Very quick.
Very quick. if you stop interrupting. We are buying people. We're getting people in, and that's our issue all along. Remember that it's all about the people, but also be wary of the silent non-compliers, right? When you bring people in, it might all look good, but sometimes people are quietly just not doing what you want them to do.
Thanks, Jay. Just in the interest of time, we'll just sort of wrap it up there. I've just sort of got one quick question for Steve and Andrew just to answer within 30 seconds. Which side of the fence do you prefer to work on?
Do you want to go first?
I like acting for purchasers because that's all I've ever been. So yeah.
No, we act on both sides. I don't know. We'll happily sit on either side. I do enjoy the sell side a little bit. You've often got a seller who, somebody mentioned before, this is their life's work. There's a lot of passion there, but at the same time, I better not say this too loud and don't show this to the clients who I'm helping buy businesses. So, no, I think there's challenges on both sides, and I enjoy it because acting on both sides, you get to see both sides of the fence, and hopefully it helps you understand what both parties are doing. Typically, our transactions, we try and have a good outcome for both parties. Hopefully better for our client, but good on both sides.
Terrific. On behalf of BJS and Aegis, I'd just like to thank Andrew and Steve for making their time available this morning.